Welcome back, everyone, to Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. I've been doing this podcast for 8 years, and every once in a while I still jump the gun. But we are going to be talking about something incredibly important for those of you who are awaiting financial aid letters. Maybe you already have them and you are trying to determine how much exactly you're going to have to pay, or maybe even take out some loans. And joining me for that conversation today is my colleague, Zachery Gries, who is a former financial aid director at Loras College in Iowa. Hi, Zach. How are you?
Hi Beth. Good. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thanks for joining today.
Happy to.
Um,
Absolutely.
all right, so we talk, obviously, you and your team on the finance side talks to a lot of people all the time about paying for college, whatever that looks like. Different families, different situations. Not everyone is going to qualify for financial aid, but many people will.
hmm
And it would be great if the letters were all formatted exactly the same and we knew exactly what to expect. But I suppose if that was the case, maybe your team wouldn't have as much to do. So I
Yes.
guess we can say yay. I don't think
Yeah.
so, though. I think we'd
Yeah.
find other things to do.
I think we
Uh,
would.
yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So it's definitely a frustration that colleges aren't always as clear as they could be. So what I was hoping we could do today is take our readers through the elements of an offer,
Yes.
and help them figure out what the individual elements mean, because they won't always be called the same thing.
Right.
Why don't we, let's start with the first one, sort of the cost of attendance versus direct cost. What are those
hmm
differences in those two terms? Will those appear in the financial aid award letter?
Yes. Really good place to start. And to give some background context to listeners, the Department of Ed, I listened to a podcast from NASPA, which is the Financial Aid National Advocacy Group. And I think there is currently murmurs of Department of Ed taking a more involved approach in financial aid award letter construction
Hmm.
because of exactly what you mentioned. Some offer letters have label certain elements one way, other offer letters label different elements or present different information. So I think it's a really good topic. But when it comes to the cost, there's usually one of two ways a school will present that
Hmm.
to individual recipients. The cost of attendance is a more comprehensive approach to discussing cost. And the cost of attendance includes two sub elements. One would be direct cost, and that would be a cost that a family is going to pay directly to the institution.
Hmm.
Could be tuition, which is the most common. It could be room and board, meal plans, fees. It's money you're directly giving to the college or the university. The second element of a cost of attendance is what we would call indirect cost. And that would be expenses that a family would likely incur even though they're not paid directly to the university or the college. So it could be things like airfare, travel expenses, hygiene expenses when perhaps you take your child to Walmart and when they're moving in and you get them new bedding and sheets and some clothing.
Yes.
Relatable. And so
Yes.
it's the college's way when they present cost of attendance of trying to show a family that if they build a budget solely around tuition and fees, they might end up short. They want to be thinking about these other expenses associated with that school year.
Right.
Now, where it gets to be tricky is that some schools do present cost of attendance, other schools only present direct costs. So,
Mm.
as a family is looking at award letters to make sure they're comparing apples to apples, it's really wise to look at the values that are being included in the cost and be aware of what they are. And some families may say, we're going to remove the indirect cost from the cost of attendance, that we have the same
Right.
number for each of these. And other families may say, we're just going to build our own indirect costs and include that as sort of this estimate. And that way we have something similar for each college that way too. But I think in either case, that's a good place to start and hopefully helps give families a sense and listeners a sense of the two different ways the school could present cost.
Well, and I like the idea. What you're saying, first of all, is this concept of families kind of creating their own, right? So
Yes.
create a spreadsheet, and so that you're comparing apples to apples. Because if
Hmm.
one college is saying this is the direct cost of college, and the other one is saying, well, this is the cost of attendance, you might get sucked into the idea that college A, which is only sharing direct cost, and college B, which is sharing cost of attendance overall, is cheaper, but it could be that one is actually B could be less expensive than the other one because their estimates are really high, and you
Absolutely.
won't need airfare, right? So there are a lot of different, and so I always do draw on my own personal experiences. And so when we were looking at all of his options, we looked only at the direct cost, and then we had our own estimates because some schools required airfare, other schools it was a quick drive, right?
Yes,
So
brilliant. And I think that's so smart because you're spot on that for some of these colleges, if you have to buy airfare to and from during the holidays, that could be, another
pricey,
$4,000,
right?
on top of the cost. Whereas if you're commuting locally a couple hours away, totally different story. So I think that's really smart.
Yeah. Well, I learned from the best, so I can't take credit for that one myself. All
Cool.
right. So let's talk about financial aid. What are the different terms you're going to see for aid itself on these lists or on these letters?
Yes, I think that's a good follow up from the cost. So the word financial aid, I would label it like an umbrella term. It's very comprehensive. And when I was a financial aid director, a lot of families may phrase their request with something like, we'd like to know what other financial aid there are. And in reality, I think they meant certain elements of financial aid. So
Right.
hopefully in breaking it apart, will help give families and listeners some language they can use and also give them some sense of what this will look like. But financial aid is there's four types of assistance included in that umbrella term. You have scholarships, grants, work opportunities, and student loans. Now, we usually in the industry break those apart and say gift aid
Mm-hmm.
is grants and scholarships because it's free. It's a gift
Right.
from somebody. You're not paying it back. And then self-help aid would be money that a student is either going to repay in the form of a loan or that they have to earn via work study. So what I've seen in financial aid offer letters is that some colleges will break apart each element. They'll show scholarships in a separate section, grants in a separate section, work and loans all in separate sections. I've seen other colleges bundle them together where they show gift aid in one section and then self-help aid in another. So that can be a little bit of similarly to the cost. Families may want to comb through that more thoroughly and make sure they're looking at the individual elements so that they compare apples to apples. Because if you get a grant and it's based on need, a family may say, we don't know if we should count on this all 4 years because
Mm-hmm.
it's based on our income and our assets. Whereas if they get a scholarship and the college says it's renewable, sort of a different price implication there. So I think that hopefully helps families get a sense of what kind of financial aid they'll see and how it will be broken apart.
The other thing I've seen, which is not ideal in my opinion, is where they don't necessarily label it. They have like a whole list, and at the bottom, it's sort of like cost to you, but they don't factor in the loans and things that you're going to be taking out,
Yes.
right? And that's money you
Mm-hmm.
have to pay back. So maybe you're not paying that today, but if you end up taking out $20,000 in loans every year, at the end of 4 years, if your child graduates in 4 years, that's 80 grand that you now owe that you
Mm-hmm.
weren't factoring into what you actually have to pay today.
100%.
Yeah.
And with software, love technology, it's done a lot, but I've seen situations where a school may lump financial aid together in a drop down menu. And so
Mm-hmm.
for a family that just quickly glances over it, they may say, oh, $30,000 of financial aid, this is great, and they move on. If you open the menu and you expand the drop down, you may then see loans, federal
Yes.
subsidized, unsubsidized plus loans. So I think this is a really good instance to remind families that it really is helpful to go into the details.
Yeah, you have to go into the details. I
Yes.
don't, we get lots of questions from people who clearly have not gone into the details. So I beg of you, Go into the details, please. This
Yes.
is so much money. It's such a big investment. You just have to go into the details. Um, okay, so we've talked about the different elements of aid. There's gift aid, which is exactly like what it sounds, right? You're not going to pay that back. And then, of course, I like the term self-help aid, even though that's not necessarily what they'll all call it. But basically, that means you're helping yourself, and in some way, shape, or form, you're going to pay for it
Yes, absolutely.
eventually. What's left after you've looked at, the gift aid, the self-help aid, the either direct costs or the cost of attendance? What else should families expect to see on these award letters?
Yeah, a couple things. I think one of the numbers that's left that is going to be really crucial again, but it's in devil's in the details, so to speak, is going to be the cost. And again, some colleges, if they're using cost of attendance, may have a cost of attendance based what we would call net price, or the price after the assistance.
Mm-hmm.
Other colleges may not calculate a cost, and they may allow you to calculate your cost, which for those of you looking at the details may be how you approach this anyways.
Mm-hmm.
So expect in some cases for the college to do the math for you, but in that case, just be aware of how they got there, if they're including
Yes.
loans or not including loans. Other colleges may leave that more open-ended. I believe the National Financial Aid Group, it's called NASFA, I believe they recommend colleges do the math based on cost of attendance. I don't know that for certain, but if the college then chooses to follow it, you might see that. If not, calculate your own. I think it's wise to calculate your own anyways, just
I
to put it
yeah.
out
I
there.
almost kind of like it if they don't, because quite honestly, that forces you to calculate it
It
yourself,
does.
right?
It
And
does.
as you were saying, like the colleges, it's important to see how they get there. I just have in my head all of every math class I ever took in my life. You have to show your work. It's
Show
not
the work.
enough.
Yes.
It is
Yes.
not enough to say, here's the answer. If
We
you
got the
can't,
answer.
right, exactly. If you can't explain how you got there, then you don't really know the answer because
Bingo.
right? You really have no idea, like, oh, I think this is what I'm paying, but I don't really know. So,
Totally agree.
yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so we've got the calculated kind of ultimately the net price that you ultimately will pay.
Mhm.
What else is in there?
Yeah, so usually a financial aid offer letter will include some additional formalities, if you want to think of them that way. Most of them will include, because typically a family's second question, once they've digested the financial aid numbers and they've calculated, they've done the math and the legwork, typically the next question is, okay, we have year one
Hmm.
understood. We have our heads wrapped around that. How do we start to assume year two, year three, year four?
Hmm.
What types of assistance is going to be continual and what types of assistance is going to be under evaluation every year based on our
Hmm.
situation. And so to help with that, many colleges will include some kind of what we used to call terms and conditions document. And it would just be almost an FAQ setup that helped families understand what they had to do to continue receiving the scholarships from one year to the next.
Hmm.
What might happen to the scholarship if, for example, the student is on campus and they move off campus? How, deadlines that are coming up in the future, next steps. So it's called terms and conditions. It was for us. I don't know that that's standardized language. It might be called something different, but I would say expect some form of supplemental document to help with clarifying questions and things
Right.
like that.
Right. And then just for our listeners' sake, that could be something like the student must maintain a specific GPA in order to retain a
Yes,
scholarship, right? Something like that.
absolutely.
And really quickly, as we are getting close to time, and I know there's one other thing we wanted to talk about. In general, how much do you see financial aid awards fluctuate if the family's financial situation essentially remains the same? They don't win the lottery, someone doesn't lose their job, which are two probably big things that could impact what a financial aid award looked like. Should families anticipate a bait and switch, or do generally most colleges are pretty consistent?
I I believe most colleges are quite
I do
consistent.
too.
I've not seen any college. I think a lot of individuals, especially in the financial aid office, go
Hmm.
into that field with wanting to be stewards and gate openers, if you will, of the higher
Yes.
education system. They want to help bridge gaps in affordability. And so I don't find that most individuals in admissions or financial aid or in colleges in general are trying to create situations where it's a gotcha, what we
Right.
taught you.
Yes.
Uh,
Now you're here.
yeah, now you're
Yeah.
here and you're stuck with us.
Yeah.
But I would say it's good to be cautious. But generally speaking, I think you're okay saying, okay, if our affordability situation stays about the same, our student does well in school, they live on campus, they perform well in their classes, the college is not going to be trying to pull any fast balls on them.
Okay, great. All right, last thing. They're generally, so what are the next steps? You get this award, you figure it all out, you decode it for yourselves. Is that also going to be part of the award? The school telling you what you need to do next?
Yes, in many cases, I think they will start to say, here's where we're headed. Now, generally, I think next steps are going to be once you've assessed the cost of each of the institutions that you as a family are seriously considering, some families may negotiate at that
Hmm.
point and try to make sure they've optimized the assistance they're getting from the college that they are interested in attending. Other times it may be a little more formal. You may have to do something to secure a loan if you're planning to use them. There might be some kind of a deposit where you put some money down to reserve your place.
Hmm.
But usually I would say the biggest hope from the offer letters is that the very first next step is that the student has a chance to finally, if they're approaching this with a price-based decision,
Hmm.
that they have the information they need to make the decision. And from there, they can work with admissions and financial aid to finalize the details, and the college may provide some of that. But I think the very first thing I'd be thinking as a recipient of an offer letter is, okay, do I have what I need to feel good about making my choice?
Right, exactly. And then pick up the phone and ask questions if you don't. It is
Absolutely.
it is still amazing to me. I'm on a couple of different Facebook groups of people who do this work for a living, and usually on the admission side, and they're like, "Is there a problem if they call the financial aid office?" Like, no, there is not a
Do it.
problem.
Do it.
No one is going to yank an offer over this. Exactly, do it. So,
Yes.
all
Yes.
right, Zach, thank you so much for joining today. I really appreciate it.
Yes, it was such a pleasure. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you later.
All right, that sounds good. All right, really quickly, we're going to take one more break. And when we get back, we're talking about visiting colleges. So don't go away.